tube station. And we also want to thank our co-sponsor for this event, which is the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies here at Harvard. Our guest this afternoon, or the event, actually, this is a formal official event. This is the Robert F. Kennedy Visiting Professor in Latin American Studies lecture. And shockingly, our speaker today is the Robert F. Kennedy Visiting Professor of Latin American Studies, Fernando Limongi. Fernando is a professor in the Department of you're in the Department of Economics, in the School of Economics at the August Foundation in Sao Paulo. He was previously a professor at USP, University of Sao Paulo. He was a professor of political science there and chair of the political science department for a number of crucial years. He has a PhD from the University of Chicago and has written, I was just reading over his CV. One doesn't often read over one's colleagues and friends' CVs, but you do it on these events, and he's written really a remarkable number of books and articles, both about Brazilian politics and Brazilian history, but also about in comparative politics. They're mostly in Portuguese, but some of them are available in English. And what I have always found notable about Fernando's work, and you see it even more in the assembly of the work, is a combination of his determination to understand a lot of the very nitty-gritty workings of politics and institutions and political parties, very fine-grained studies and explorations, coupled with always keeping an eye on the big picture, and the big picture about Brazilian politics, about Latin American politics, and about comparative politics. I do have to add, as a personal note here, it's a special pleasure to me to get to introduce you and present you here, since it was, I don't know when it was, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, that you hosted me at USP. And we did a similar song and dance, but we reversed the chairs. In any case, we've been very grateful to have Fernando here with us for this semester. For those of you who haven't had a chance to grab onto him and get to know him and plumb his brain, you have about another 6 weeks or something, or maybe less. So I encourage you to do that. And that said, let me introduce you to Professor Limongi, who will talk for about 30 minutes. Is that about right? It's a little bit more. A little bit more than 30 minutes. So it's Brazilian time, so it'll be something between 30 minutes and an hour and a half. And then we'll have time for questions thereafter. So that's it. The floor is yours, and welcome.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everybody. I'm very happy and proud of being here at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. I'm happy to be at the doctoral class also, and to spend this semester here. And thanks, Alex, for the introduction. So what I will be talking about today is about the politics of impeachment and trying to understand this Latin American new political instability. I just wrote a book about Dilma Rousseff impeachment, very in-depth analysis of one case. And what I will present now today is an attempt to generalize or to think about other cases of impeachments, and more broadly, mandate interruptions, presidents that did not complete their mandates. So the fact is that Fernando Collor de Mello, in 1992, was the first democratic elected president to be impeached. It all, of course, depends in what you consider to be the case of Richard Nixon. If he resigned because he would be impeached, or if he just resigned. So this is the first observation that is very important to discuss presidents that do not complete their mandate, because some of them will take decisions before an impeachment. So it's very difficult sometimes to distinguish the cases, if it is the case of impeachment or if it's more broadly political crisis that culminate in this resignation of the president. So, but the fact, as I said, is that Collor de Mello was the first elected president, democratic elected president, to be impeached. Right the next year, 1993, Carlos Andrés Pérez in Venezuela was also impeached. So the Latin American literature, right after jumped on these two cases and started to talk about a new political instability in Latin that would that impeachment was the manifestation of this new political instability. But if you think about the phrase new political instability, you may think that instability is continual. So there's something that is perennial or permanent, and just the modality of instability that changes. So there is a suggestion here that coups and instability and impeachments are the same thing, or that they are just manifestations of some underlying condition that did not change, so that Latin America is always the same. And as other cases than Collor and Carlos Andrés Pérez happened, not all of them as clear cases of impeachment, so resignations, kind of forcing interruption of the terms. The literature started to be more ambitious, so new instability, breakdowns of presidential regimes. And breakdowns here has clear meaning that remembers the famous series of books by Juan Lins, The Breakdown of Democratic Regime. So again, this association or this attempt to say that, you know, it's politics as usual in Latin America, nothing's changing in Latin America. Before you had coups, now you have impeachment. And more recently, we started to think that this, or there is the talk that this was the manifestation of an institutional problem. So if you go again and started to think about Juan Lins, then you think, well, presidentialism or the presidential regimes are necessarily or intrinsically unstable. They lead to conflicts, institutional conflicts that have no way of being solved. So the only way to solve these conflicts is through breaking democracy or breaking the mandate of an elected president. So there is this instability is general, it's institutional, and there is nothing new in all of that. So it's just politics as usual in Latin America. But the fact, and I don't intend you to read this table, but here we have the 18 Latin American countries since 1989, that is the year of election of Fernando Collor de Mello, and I followed all the elections, and the name of the number of times in which the president completed its mandate or had its mandate interrupted. So the bottom line here is you cannot read this table, it's too a bad table. So the bottom line is
It's like the line on the eye chart.
can't read. So it was kind of. So the thing is, the basic facts are we have 136 presidential elections in democracies in Latin America since 1989. Of these, 118 presidents completed their mandate. So that is to say that the norm is to have a president that is elected, takes office, and leaves office in the moment that he would or she would have to. So interruption of the mandate through impeachment or resignation or any other means is exceptional. It's not the norm. So we have to pay attention to what is the pattern, what is the norm. Only 3 of these 16 cases of presidents that left before the term are clear cases of impeachment. Clear in the sense that the president was really impeached and left office after being impeached. There are some cases in which the president is not that clear that the president was impeached or was not a coup, like in Paraguay, that in 2 days they impeached the president. One day they passed it in the House, the other day passed it in the Senate. So it's pretty much more clear in the coup. And you have several other cases that are very problematical. For instance, in Ecuador, the president was declared mentally unfit by a majority vote and was ousted. And also Peru and Ecuador are not clear cases of presidentialism because the president can dissolve the Congress and Congress can censor the president or ministers. So these are kind of confusing cases. But what I'm trying to do is to kind of understand the type of exits or forced or legal ways in which presidents leave the mandate. I could not yet figure a clear typology or understand all the complex cases. The thing is that if you go through all these cases in which presidents do not complete the mandate, they are very political crises that are really confusing, really complex. So it's very difficult to have a general view of this process and try to generalize. There are cases of resignations in the middle of political crisis, and only 6 clear coups, cases in which the constitution is not respected. But no case the electoral calendar was suspended. So several cases in which the president is ousted by forces that are like in Ecuador, in one moment in which the militaries came and say, "You president, you have to leave." The vice president assumes and the mandate is completed and new election comes. So most of the time in Latin America after 1989, you would define as democratic regimes in which the calendar is respected and elections follow elections. So that makes us think about this new in a more clear term, right? So there's something that is really new going on. That is not coups as in the past, in which the militaries would take office and the electoral calendar would be suspended. So we have political crises that are not, that lead to some exceptional or some extreme solution. But they never, or most of them, do not lead to the breaking of the Constitution and the breaking of the electoral calendar. All presidents that were democratically elected in Latin America since 1989, they took office. So the electoral outcomes were respected. So the fact that you have a political crisis, you know, it's part of life. That happens in democracies. This is common in democracies. What is not common is that 16 of these cases, of 136 presidents, some have to leave office before their term, not complete their term. And only 3 of them through impeachment. So what I intend to understand, or I'm trying to in this project that I'm starting now, is to understand what makes this crisis, what is common to all these crises, and which type of solution you have in each one of them. What are the outcomes? And so the outcome is resignation, sort of coup, or impeachment. But each one of them has some characteristics that you have to pay attention to understand what transpires. So the general approach to understand crisis in this Latin American literature is this kind of game here, right? This game and the idea of a political conflict or institutional conflict. But see that here, the game ends. And what I'm trying to call your attention is that the game doesn't stop here. Because if the president is impeached, what happens afterwards is that you have a new president that will sit and exercise power. So if you decide to impeach the president, you have to consider who will be the next president. If you force the president to resign, you have to consider that a new president will sit and will govern. So here we have a very narrow-minded or myopic type of behavior that cannot be the one that political actors are considering. In the case of the impeachment, there is something that more clear that political actors have to take into account, that the person that will come to power is known beforehand. You know who he is. He's the vice president that has been elected with this guy here. So why you want to change this guy by his vice president? That you have to have some very good reason to do that. Otherwise, you are not changing anything, right? And so what we have to take into account is the full game. And the game in which new elections will happen in the previously defined calendar. So this guy that may take the place of this one, the vice president that will take the place of this guy, will run an election, will be sitting as the president. And in most of these countries, he may compete for the position. So if you oust a president that is unpopular, you may be given to the party that is sitting a condition to be in a better position in the next election. So that's why this will not happen very frequently. So this model here of inter-branch conflicts that are almost in this general setup, impeachment should happen every single president. And the vice president should be impeached also. And so you will never stop that. So these actors here in this type of model are not rational at all. So you have to think that this is a democracy, you remain a democracy, and there will be new elections, and that everybody has to consider all this or take all this into account. So now changing gears. So now I will try to, from the general propositions that I made, come to my case, come to Brazil, to see the Dilma's impeachment, and try to, from what I learned from this case, try to derive some hypotheses or some ideas about how to explain or what is intrinsic of impeachment processes. So the first thing to understand, and I have to kind of put this here, is that despite the fact that Brazil is perhaps today the mostly fragmented party system in the world, and it has been for quite a while highly fragmented, and you always hear all these descriptions of Brazilian politics as almost chaotic. That was not what was going on in Brazil up to the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff. Right after the impeachment of Collor, the political system get pretty much a bipartisan political system in the competition for the presidency. Each one of the groups, or so we had two big parties that will coordinate the competition for the presidency. From one side, from the right, the PSDB, or PSDB, and on the left, the PT alliance. And so you had pretty much a very, very organized political system in which in the first round of the presidential elections, around 75 to 85% of the votes would be concentrated in these two big parties, two big coalitions, always had by PSDB and PT. So you have basically a duopoly or something like that, or a cartel between these two big parties that were controlling the political process. So when Dilma was re-elected in 2014, the perspective was that in 2018, you would repeat that, right? And since PT had won from 2002 to 2014, it was pretty much expected that power would go to PSDB in the next election. So that was the setup in which the crisis transcribed. In a very predictable system, in which the transition or the transference of power was pretty much, could be anticipated. Moreover, because here you have an enormous economic crisis right after the election of Joe. So it's pretty much the same that happening here after PSDB was re-elected to the president, served the second term. When it started, it was clear that PSDB would not get the third term because of the economic crisis. So that was the setup when the thing started. And so what we had in the House was, or in the House and in the Senate, a big center-left coalition in which the left had more or less 100 seats, the center 240 more or less, and the right 100 seats more or less. Since you need 2/3 to pass a impeachment process, that means that the opposition cannot pass an impeachment. And that is a basic fact to explain impeachments, that not always is taken into account. The opposition, by definition, cannot pass by itself an impeachment procedure. There is always a government in place. The government is working. No impeachment happened, or none of this crisis happened in the first year of the government. It's always after the government is working. So there is always some coalition working that sustain the government, and this coalition has to break if you were to have an impeachment or a resignation of the president in the middle of a political crisis. And by definition, the opposition cannot do it. More than that, it's also not true that the opposition wants to impeach or to force the resignation of a president. The opposition, the best alternative to the opposition is to wait to the next election. And as this senator says, I don't want to be governed by the vice president. I want to wait to the next term. And the best alternative to me is to make the government bleed, to extend the crisis and to wait for my turn. And in fact, he ended up supporting the impeachment and became the minister of Temer. So something has to change, right? For him to prefer now to be member of this government than to remain in opposition. And in the case of a government that was sustained by a coalition, and that the vice president was not from the same party than the president, here for PSDB meant that Temer could run for president in 2018 and not PSDB be the head of the ticket. So why the opposition wants to support an impeachment has to be explained. In general, in this type of explanation, the opposition is everybody counts the opposition as being in favor of deposing the president. This is not true. You have to explain that. So, as I said, that means that the first thing that you have to understand is the breaking of the coalition. The fight within the coalition. or within the government. Without this break within the government, you do not have, if you don't have that, the president will complete his term, his or her term. So, and of course, this break or this fight has to be something big, right? Otherwise, it's politics as usual. Politicians are always fighting with each other. So it has to be something vital, something very important, in which the future of the coalition or the future of the party is at stake. So we are considering something that has to be real important, and important in electoral terms in the next rounds. Parties have to think, or leaders have to think in a long way. So in the case of Dilma, in the case of Brazil, what was at stake was what was the position of the government towards corruption. So you had in the past, during the first Lula administration, this mensalão scandal, or an investigation that put PT against the wall, so to speak. So the party or the coalition had to answer that. And that divided the coalition. What to do regarding the accusations that the party was too corrupt. And so there are basically two positions within the party or the coalition. Pretend that nothing happened, saying we are not corrupt, we have done nothing, but that was politically unfeasible because the investigations were going on and the party was losing support because of that. And the other position was try to recuperate the image of the party as being clean and support the investigation. And that was the position that Dilma took. The president started to support the investigations. And that was not noted by, in general, by analysts, political analysts, that Dilma was supporting the car wash operation. And this operation and this fight, that's the difficult part of my explanation. That is, this investigation got out of control. So the strategy of Dilma was, I will launch an operation against corruption and I will control the outcome. And I will use that investigation to clean the political scene, but only for these guys that I don't like. And of course, everybody realized that and started to try to use the investigation. And the opposition, of course, realized that the best way to go was to promote the investigation, to ask the investigation to go further and further. And here, the key element, and that I don't know how to put in a more general explanation of impeachments and resignations, is the action of the non-political actor. In this case here, where the judiciary and the public attorney that Dilma supported, and they started to go against the whole political class. And it's, in the case of Brazil, it's important to understand that this group of investigators, when I'm saying they are not part of the political system, they are not politicians, they are not elected politicians, but they have political connections. And so the investigation per se was divided into big groups inside the office of the prosecutor. But the fact is that the car wash operation started to press the politicians, started to investigate more and more politicians. And when politicians realized that things were getting out of control, they started to try to control the car wash operation. And so the reaction of car wash operation was to go to everything. And so in 2016, the car wash operation launches a series of phases or operations, as they called, in which they signal, they send a signal that they would go after the whole political class, that everybody would go if they tried to close the investigations. The reaction was that the car wash operation would radicalize. So this is the aspect that is, for me, yet to Dilma's case, that I cannot know how to generalize or how to find it in the other cases. But to explain this moment in which the political crisis get out of control, and you have to go to a so radical solution as to force the president out, I tend to think that you have to have some external actor forcing, or at least the whole political class has to see its future as being threatened. So that you need a radical solution to avoid higher damage. So that you have to sell the president, so to speak, throw the president or part of the political class as unwanted merchandise, like throwing in the sea to save the boat. And that's what happened with Dilma. So in one moment, as the car wash operation goes after all this political class, the reaction is, we have to stop this. So here in December of 2015, car wash goes against the PMDB leadership, against the president of the Senate, and says, I will put this guy in jail. Here, triple X is they go against Lula, the ex-president. Here, Acarajé, they go against Dilma Rousseff. They put the guy that ran her campaign in jail, saying that her finances were corrupted, that Odebrecht had paid everything for her. Here they arrest Lula. So they are kind of going forward to avoid the political class deal to stop the investigations. And the ship operation is the last moment in here in which the car wash finds all the records from Odebrecht. Odebrecht had paid all politicians in Brazil in the last 20 years or so. So then the whole political class is threatened. And so this recording of this guy, Homero Jucá, that is the senator, this is a tape that was made by a car wash operation the day after one of these big operations. And this guy will be the guy that will put together the impeachment coalition, will reshuffle the coalition and unite everybody. It pretty much says that we have to stop this bleeding. Right? So the political class is being compromised by this political crisis. And the only way of stopping that is to take a very, very crucial decision. And the crucial decision is to impeach the president. So to impeach the president is something really big. It's not something that you do every day, so to speak.
Sir, but is the date correct? The impeachment was on August 31st.
Yeah, but this is before. That's before. No, that's March. Because this is this is English.
I was carried away by the context. I'm sorry. Because I was like,
so I don't know if I can generalize the political crisis and to understand all political crises in the same setup. But from my reading of all these 16 cases in which presidents are forced to resign or resigned or impeached, you always have this feeling that either we do something or we all will go through. And we have to react and to stop. This is different in each case, a bit of what is at stake. But always you need something big at stake. But it's a way of trying to preserve democracy in order. Because it's a way of trying to reset the system. So, conclusions or quasi-conclusions. So no political regime is immune to crisis. So it's not that Latin America is perennially unstable, it's just that crisis happens. No president is immune to an impeachment threat. There is always there this threat. He has to deal with that. But impeachment is, will, and should be a hair event.
I remember listening to the vote that was being given on Dilma's impeachment and the various pious explanations, as you know, as people said, you know, I do this for my God and justice. I wonder what I just can't imagine they weren't smirking at each other as they were saying that. All right, the floor is open for questions.
Well, first, thank you for a really interesting talk. And I actually just want to go back to the first slide you started with, because I think that's a super important slide, and we moved away from it so quickly that I'm not sure if everyone understands kind of the importance this has for just debates of the whole region about democracy. So I like that slide so much. So I sent it to an Argentine colleague who already responded. Already responded. Super interesting! Exclamation mark. Why do we have this feeling that we are a failure? That is not a bad record. Okay, so can I just ask you to talk about I remember the slide that says Latin America new instability basic facts. Basic facts. Okay, you may think these are basic facts, but these are not the basic facts as viewed by most political scientists in Latin America or most political scientists in America about Latin America. In other words, this is already a surprising
16 cases.
Yeah, this
I
is
think that 16 cases are
so I'm
is
just,
the normal.
can you just talk? This is a surprising set of information
That I finished, yes.
offers a different point of view about Latin American democracy writ large. Can you just tell us a little more about this?
We are a democratic region now.
So
Okay, so you want me to propose?
No, why do so few people believe it? Your colleagues, our colleagues, why do so few people believe that you're a democratic region?
Well, the Brazilians say that it's the vira-lata syndrome. So we think that we are stray dogs.
A stray dog.
That's an old Brazilian writer that has this expression, the syndrome of the vira-lata dog, the dog that is in the street. So we tend to think ourselves as bad persons or
Hirschman called it fracasomania.
Yeah, the fracasomania.
So Hirschman was right that you're still.
Yeah, but this is after 89.
Yeah, of course.
So up to 89, we had coups. And so I'm not explaining the old instability. And I think that we don't know that well about the old instability. And there is the first instability also. There is the 19th century instability or up to the Second World War. Then there is after the Second World War, and then after redemocratization. So if you go to the after Second World War, my bet is Cold War. Simple as that. So a president is elected, you don't like it, you came here, talk with the Americans, so now you don't do that anymore. But still, this thing about corruption is not totally endogenous. There is an international, because most of these cases here are scandal and corruption, right? Mm-hmm. And corruptions are kind of, so the case, the most clear case is one of Colombia, Samper. He is just elected, and the American embassy releases a tape in which he is talking with a narco trafficker receiving money. So before he took office. So most of these cases also have something of, but I'm saying nothing with this. Really, this is the basic fact. And the basic fact is no suspension of the electoral calendar, and all the presidents take office. So we have only two cases of suspension of democracy in this period. Fujimori, and then Ortega in Nicaragua, that is up to today. No, three, and Chavez. And so we have very unstable countries. But it's not, doesn't mean it's Latin America. That may be Peru and Ecuador, right? They happen to be Latin America. But if you think about occurrences of threats of impeachment, the country in which you have more It's here, in which is more partisan. Is in here. No,
I'm seeing other hands, so I want.
well, how many? I had only 30 minutes.
Yeah, but we have 2.5 hours to
round?
drill. So, we're,
No,
Can we make a round question?
what,
A round
no.
let's start out, go ahead. Why don't you tell us who you are and then, ask whatever question you have.
I would like to know how we can put in this conversation the judicial power, because in that timing we already have uma vaga do Supremo Tribunal Federal em jogo, em disputa. E o STF depois se tornou, depois não, ao longo de todo o processo foi um ator-chave. E o próprio Sérgio Moro que o senhor trouxe era, né, estava ali na disputa, queria a vaga de ministro da Justiça, porque depois sabia que poderia pleitear a vaga no STF. Então, como o senhor coloca o judicial power in this conversation?
The impeachment is very emotional in Brazil. We cannot. It's difficult for us to talk of that in English.
No,
I'm just saying that, and everything came together, right? And so I don't know what you have in mind when you say the Supreme Court and so the Supreme Court was supposed to be an arbiter, but it was not. And during the whole car wash investigation, the Supreme Court kind of let it go, so to speak, because car wash operation did not follow the rules. It broke with the basic due process kind of stuff, but it had support in the Supreme Court. More than that, the thing that is more strange to understand, it's the main guy that was the relator, the reviewer,
Reporting justice.
relator of the
Review justice or.
the guy that the member of the Supreme Court that was supervising the work of the car wash was very close to Dilma. And so he let them run. Because Dilma thought she would use that against her enemies. And backfired. She miscalculated. And in fact, if I were to explain only the Brazilian case and this case, everybody miscalculated. Everybody. To the point that you come with this idea, well, so all these guys are irrational, they cannot calculate the consequence of their acts. So kind of that, yeah. Maybe they all miscalculated. And so everyone thought that they had the things under control, that when they would say the word, things would stop. But it got out of control.
Let's keep going around. I'm gonna, since we started a little bit late, I'm gonna let us go a little past 5:30. And since there clearly are people with their hands raised. Gee.
Thank you so much for this really insightful talk. As I think about your generalization question about, in particular, the reset idea, that are you suggesting that it's not so much the nature of the case, whether it's corruption or something else that the investigation and finally trials get to, but it's more about that maybe these are, given your facts, that the duopolistic sort of setup, the setup you had, is really working, and that these scandals are a representation of the competition between the parties, and that becomes part of the crisis, and then whether to impeach or resign is then kind of the political option that responds to the crisis.
Because, in fact, these two parties, they had a cartel.
Right.
And they were being financed by the same Odebrecht, all they paid their campaigns. So what do you have to explain and why they decided to fight? And they would lend money one to the other easily and have compromise about that. And so it's not that they could kept going, why they didn't. And in the case of Venezuela, the idea of Carlos Andrés Pérez, the idea of being on the verge of something big is more clear because Chavez already attempted a coup before the impeachment. So politicians were really desperate in Venezuela, seeing that things were unraveling, that they could lose everything. So they had to try to reset the system earlier than through a new election. But it didn't work, it backfired. And in fact, the way they behaved with the president just helped Chavez, right? They killed each other. And the two parties that used to cooperate in Venezuela since '58, they just disappeared from. It was the most stable democracy in Latin America, with Colombia, in which the competition was pretty much regulated between the two, was kind of more than any other place. So I don't know.
There's a hand over here.
Yeah. So I understood the puzzle very well, but I'm not sure I understood your answer to the puzzle in terms of
I don't know.
causal mechanism, right?
No.
Because so you said when the investigation is launched, they think it's going to PT and Dilma thinks that's going to help them, and then it doesn't happen, so their prediction is wrong. But what did they miscalculate exactly, and why didn't they do as they planned? And then same stuff for the coalition. Why did it break? So you quoted the person that says he doesn't want to work with the vice president, but then actually he's going to work with the vice president. And then when you saw the quote, "They're going to bleed us," it's unclear to me that whether they were more scared of the judiciary apparatus on the one hand, but then why didn't that came up earlier, and why did they thought they could control it if it was that dangerous? Did something change? Was there a change of cultural institution, a change of law, or I don't know? Because clearly that wasn't precedented. And then on the other hand, maybe two other threads in that regard. One, the public opinion. You didn't mention the public opinion, but my hypothesis would be that politicians are concerned that, oh my God, they're going to all believe we're corrupt and we might have our head on pikes, French style. So that's not good. And the last dimension would be negotiation. So like, oh, I don't want to roll with the vice president. He's an idiot. I don't respect him. Okay, he's offering me a position as minister, so we can talk. And then when does the negotiation kick in to share the potential cake?
When I said I don't either, I was referring to the generally,
Right.
not to the case.
Right.
The case, I guess I understand and got it right. The thing is, how do I use these two cases that I know better, that are Collor and Dilma, to go to a more general theory of political break of president or interruption of the money. So that's what I don't know what is general and how can I be precise about. There is one mechanism. Probably there is no one mechanism. So these are such a rare events that maybe there is no rule. It's just something that happened. Something crazy goes on. Regarding public opinion, it is a fact that all the presidents that resign or impeached or forced out, they have very low support. But it's not true that all presidents that have low support are forced out, resign, or impeached. So it may be a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. So you find lots of presidents that are very unpopular, and lots of situations in which politicians live with that. meaning you complete your term, but you do not govern anymore. So one case is Temer, the guy that succeeded Dilma. He started with very good popularity and starting to work when Lava Jato car wash came after him and released tapes that he was negotiating in the kickbacks. And he got even lower than Dilma in popularity, but no one attempted to impeach him.
So it's more like when it spreads to other politicians, because if it's the president, they're fine. But if it's the general
and it
distrust
has-
of the whole class, then
So it's the whole class,
right,
and then a part of the class says, let's try something like
let's cut the limit.
let's reset and get rid of this and say, oh, this is the scapegoat.
Mhm.
He pays, and we try to save ourselves. And sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work.
I think we'll have time for two last questions and then you, but you've had your hand up for quite a while.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for such an insightful lecture and full of interesting facts about our country. The matter of the impeachment is still very polarizing.
I know that you don't like
And,
it.
and you know, I have to confess my own bias.
So you are for
Yes,
impeaching all the problem.
Not all. I was in favor indeed of the impeachment of the last three presidents, but I even signed one of Duma's impeachment processes. I am currently a deputy member of the federal parliament, but I think it's important to acknowledge also the economic situation, the complete inability of Duma to deal with the Congress, that contrasted with Temer's factual and actual ability to deal with it, having been a Speaker of the House for some time, leader of governments. Also, Duma's relationship with Eduardo Cunha, the then president, the then Speaker of the House, and additionally, I wanted to ask about this concept of democratic instability, because I think we can all agree that democracy is much more than the procedural electoral process that periodically having it. How many of the Latin American countries do you think would pass by the standards of, let's say, Robert Allen Dahl's criteria? Now we currently have several countries in which we have
criteria.
yeah.
All
How
of
many?
them that I'm calling democratic passes the Dow criteria.
All of them.
The thing is that
They have competition.
Yes.
They have freedom
Yes.
of association.
yes,
They have,
yes, they all have.
because, in Venezuela,
Venezuela is not democratic.
election against Capriles, for instance, was
No, democratic. As I said, we have
right.
3 cases. One interregnum, that is Fujimori, and 2 cases in which we are not democratic anymore. Venezuela and Nicaragua.
All the rest you believe would meet his criteria?
The thing is, maybe this is something that has nothing to do with political institutions, that our countries are poor or difficult, unequal. So any government in there, you can come with any institutions, we will have a hard time. And some of this period is a period of real hard time. So this is the beginning of this period is the period of economic reforms at the end of the debt crisis, with hyperinflation and a radical transformation of the economy of all these countries, with opening, the end of the import substitution strategy. So radical changes happened and democracy survived. So, and regarding Dilma's lack of quality, we all forget that Dilma was the president for whole mandate. No one said a thing about her being unqualified. You Everybody, all PT is unqualified.
It's half of the country.
But she ran for re-election. She was re-elected. And all the parties that were with her in the first mandate supported her during the election and after the election. And they only left the government in March 2016. They were all in the government, doing all this unpopularity, economic crisis, manifestations in the street. No party said, I will leave. And even after Eduardo Cunha said, I am for the impeachment, not even PMDB, his party, left the ministries, portfolios. So the president has several weapons. And then if you think about that, well, she's doesn't know how to handle it. Look at the ministry reform that she did. She gave health to PMDB. Try to survive.
Yeah, so it's a very, first of all, thank you so much for a very interesting talk. It's connected to what we're saying right now. How do you evaluate the strength of institutions and democracy in Brazil? To an outsider, we see kind of ups and downs. We see kind of very different behavior, the impeachment of Dilma compared to Temer, for example, and how this was very different, or the attempt to impeach Temer, this was very...
So I didn't understand. What was the first part of the...
How do you evaluate the strength of institutions and of democracy in Brazil?
The tension.
The strength. How strong? Yeah.
How strength?
Yeah. So we see the storming of the Capitol, we see the arrest of Lula, and then Lula becomes president, and then we're like, is it similar to the US? Is it different from the US?
We have the lousiest president as you can have.
I might say.
I'm compared to with the league competing head to head with some other guys. Maybe Argentina will beat everybody now. We have the champion of the... And it survived as a democracy. You know, our ex-president tried everything. Everything you can imagine to destroy. And he was, he's so stupid that he was not even able to destroy, to accomplish what he intended. But, but I have a hard time with
Here's
this.
the stupidity.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I
guys.
have a hard time with this trying to measure strength of democracy. I don't have the skill or the mechanism.
You're hopeful, basically.
Huh?
You're hopeful about the future.
No, but I mean that what I think is that there is no suspension of the electoral calendar inside. So, you know, Bolsonaro can be elected, Lula can be elected. Extreme. That may happen, and that will happen in the future. And there is no way of buying an insurance against. If you don't like Bolsonaro, against Bolsonaro. If you don't like Lula, against Lula.
It's like both.
Yeah, it's
Or
more,
if you dislike both, you cannot buy insurance against both.
it's more about losing an election. It's more about like arresting a candidate and putting them in jail for years.
Oh,
So
this is another problem. This is the judiciary and this whole trend of combating corruption and making corruption the big thing. So if you look at Brazil, the trends in the public opinion, they were not that corruption was the main problem of Brazil. It became. And it became in the sense that it was produced.
Okay, I think we have now
I think we get to go to dinner after, so we